Okay, so today we are going to be wrapping up the Mistborn series. But before we do, there are two things I want to draw your attention to. You're probably wondering, hey, Mr. Francy, why is this bookshelf so empty? Well, that's because the majority of the books that are in this shelf I'm referring to today. They're part of the Mistborn series. The second thing I want to notify you of, or at least confirm if you are a Mistborn fan and you're thinking, Mr. Francy, how are you wrapping up this series? The series is not over. Brandon Sanderson has recently announced that he is going to at least be releasing one more book in the second era of the Mistborn series, but I am now, as of the end of last month, up to date with all of the currently published books in the Mistborn series. So I had a long and hard think about how I was going to do this because I had reviewed books 1, 2, 3, and 4, but I did not review book 5. Which really kind of surprised me because I preferred book 5 to book 4, so the fact that I actually reviewed book 4 but not book 5 had me thinking. But anyway, I'm going to let that go. Today, what I've ultimately decided to do is to review the series as a whole, because I think that there are some important things that you guys need to know if you have not read this series before that I kind of wish I knew before going in. Now, granted, some of the information I'm going to be telling you guys is available out there by other booktubers or book bloggers or just information out there in general, but I was not aware of this stuff going in to certain aspects of the series as a whole. More to come. And I just want to pass this stuff on to you guys so that you are prepared for it. But let's first of all clarify the most important thing when it comes to the Mistborn series. While it is one series, there are two separate eras. The first era of the Mistborn series is, I don't even know what the first era is really called, but I will just call it the Vin era. Okay, so the first era of the Mistborn series, the Vin era, has 3 books. The first book is my favourite book of all time, Mistborn, The Final Empire. The second book is Mistborn, The Well of Ascension. And the third book, which I have a white cover for, is Mistborn, The Hero of Ages. And in case you're wondering, all of these books are, and in the second era too, are by Brandon Sanderson. But this is the first era. The second era begins with The Alloy of Law. This is book 4. Then goes on to Shadows of Self, which is book 5. And then goes on to The Bands of Mourning, which is book 6. So I'm going to start off by discussing Era 1, and then I'm going to talk about Era 2. But between the two, I'm going to have a bit of a discussion with you guys about some things that you should be aware of if you've just come off reading Era 1, or if you're about to just read Era 1, things that you should know before you jump into Era 2. So let's discuss Era 1. All of these books are absolutely amazing. Now, I am going to be giving you premises for each book. I'm going to try not to spoil them for you, but in case I do, I just want to put a just-in-case spoiler warning here, because I don't know. I feel like I could really just jump right in and give a lot of spoilery reviews, but anyway, let's just dive right in. So book 1, Mistborn, The Final Empire, sets us up on this epic journey that we're about to partake in. All of these books are tomes, which means that they are at least 500 pages long. But they're worth the 500 pages. Brandon Sanderson is an amazing writer. The Mistborn series as a whole is a fantasy. It is a high fantasy, which means it takes place in a whole new world of Brandon Sanderson's creation, and it's a high fantasy with hard magic systems. So hard magic systems refers to any magic system where there is a limitation on the magic itself. An example of a soft magic system would be Harry Potter. While there are spells in the Harry Potter series, there are no limitations to those spells. Provided you have a wand and you're a witch or a wizard, you can cast the spell. There may be laws against certain spells, but you can still cast them. There's no limitations, and you can probably cast them 1,000,000 times over because You just can. This makes it a soft magic system. With a hard magic system, there are limitations, and this series comes with a hard magic system. So let's quickly talk about the fact that it's a whole new world and relate it to the fact that every book in the first era is at least 500 pages or more. Part of the reason for that is so that Brandon Sanderson can do a ton of world building. So, what is world building? Well, I'm glad you asked. World building is the process of building up a world by introducing this world to an author's readers. So if you are an author, or well, if an author has chosen to write a high fantasy series of their own, which would be a world of its own creation, the author's own creation, you need to take time to explain this world to us. Harry Potter is, and I keep referring back to Harry Potter because Harry Potter is the opposite to Mistborn in that Harry Potter is a low fantasy with soft magic systems, where Mistborn is a high fantasy with hard magic systems. So Harry Potter, while there is a ton of magic, and while Hogwarts is only a school that exists for witches and wizards, Harry Potter is still set in the UK. So it's still set in our world, where Mistborn is set in a completely different world that we've never heard of, that Brandon Sanderson made up all of his own accord. So he spends a good amount, a fair chunk of this book, explaining the world to you. But what I love about Brandon Sanderson is he is more of a shower than a teller. That's not to say there isn't any exposition in this book, because there is, but for the majority of the time, you learn things alongside the main character, or the protagonist, who's on the cover here, whose name is Vin. Now let's talk a little bit about the premise of this book. This book follows Vin, who was part of a thieving crew of men who were all treating her very poorly because she is a woman. It is set many hundreds of years in the past in a world not like anything we've ever seen before. In fact, the plants are not green, and somewhere along the way in the first era, one of the characters is telling another character about how in other worlds there is green grass, and they're like, what? So yeah, really completely different. Everything's different. And rather than rain falling from the sky, ash falls from the sky. So very, very different. So Vin, while being mistreated in this thieving crew, is discovered by a very charismatic character that I will follow to the end of my days. Oh my gosh. I don't profess to have fictional boyfriends, but if ever I did, Kelsia. Oh my god, he is my fictional boyfriend. He finds Vin and he rescues her and offers her a place on his team, which is not necessarily a thieving crew, they're just a crew. And Vin joins that crew. Now, that crew treat her really, really well, but everyone in that crew has some sort of a magical ability, which we'll get into in a moment. Also, you need to know about this book that the beginning of this book starts right off in a world where the bad guy won. So, yeah, that's interesting because it's something that I had never read before. Generally, it's the bad guy versus the good guy, or the bad person. Let's be politically correct here. The bad person versus the good person. And generally speaking, the good person wins. This book opens up with the bad person having already won, and he is ruling over this world as a tyrant known as the Lord Ruler. To add insult to injury, or to add more complexity, I should say, the Lord Ruler is invincible, so he can't be killed. So that just makes life even better, right? Imagine that, waking up every day in a world where ash is continually falling from the sky, you're being ruled by a tyrant, and he can't die. Wonderful! So, as we move along, we learn more and more about not only the world, but also the magic system incorporated in this world. So, the magic system works by ingesting certain metals, and a standard metal that you ingest could enhance or could enact a magical ability within you. One of the reasons why the magic system in Mistborn is a hard magic system is because unless you ingest the metal at the time you want to use that magic, you cannot use the magic. So, excuse me. So I don't want to give away any specifics, but I'll just make something up. Let's just say if you ingested a particular white metal and that white metal gave you the ability of X-ray vision. Let's just say that's not what happens here, but I'm just giving you an example. So you ingest that white metal and let's say for an hour, because you also have a time frame, for an hour you can see with X-ray vision, and then when that hour runs out, you no longer can. Now you're walking down the street and you're passing a house where there's a lot of screaming going on and you want to use your X-ray vision, but you don't have that white metal on you. Well, I'm sorry, unless you have that metal on you so you can down it, you won't have access to that magical ability. One of the things I love about Brandon Sanderson is that he introduced me to magical limitations, to hard magic systems. So I really did appreciate that. There are many metals that do many different things, and as we go along in the series, there are many combinations of metals putting more than one together that do many things as well. Now, there are 3 different types of magical beings in this world. The first is Mistborn, which Vin is, and as is Kelsia. A Mistborn is a being, or well, I mean, they're mostly human, but anyway, I'll just say being. A being who has the potential to access every single bit of magic that you can access with every kind of metal out there. Then there are mistings. A misting is even further limited because they only have access to one magical ability with one metal. And then there are ferrochemists who are different yet again and can do different things. One main character that we're introduced to who is a ferrochemist can research a ton of information and store that information into what is known as his metal mine. So he is someone who loves to research religion, and there are hundreds of religions out there, and he researches a lot of them and stores them into his metal mine. Also, if he decides to be weak for a day, it's something like that. If he decides to be weak for a day and store the strength that he would have had for that day into his metal mine, he can then access his metal mine at a later point for more enhanced strength because he gave it up that day. So you can see, the magic system is really complex, but the story is so amazing. The first thing that I love about the first era is that our protagonist, Vin, is a headstrong female protagonist. This is something I've always loved. Anytime you want to introduce a female protagonist to me that is headstrong, yay, I'm going to grab that book with open arms and start reading it. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that. Kelsia, there are things that I can't say. I can't say. But I love Kelsia, and I'm just going to leave it at that and move on. So, yeah, so it's a really good book. I don't want to say more than that. Well of Ascension continues the story on with Vin. Vin ends up in a relationship, and he ends up in a relationship with let's just call them a royal. And because she's in a relationship with a royal, there is a lot of politicking that goes on in the second book. The second book is not as action-packed, but it is still amazing. It's really, 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 really good. So the Mistborn community seems to be a bit divided with the second book. Some people really don't like how political and less action-packed the book is, but it's still an amazing read. I gave all of the books in the first era 5 stars, so I really love this. The third book it's a lot of wrapping up, and for the first 3 quarters we are wrapping up everything that we've been introduced to so far, but the final quarter is, oh my god, Brandon Sanderson. When I read book 1, Brandon Sanderson just revolutionized reading for me, and I recorded a quick 5-minute video the moment I finished this book, and I was crying. That's how much of an impact it had on me. The Hero of Ages, the way it ends, Brandon Sanderson is always 10 steps ahead of his readers, and it just made for a powerful conclusion. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. And I really couldn't wait to pick up book 4 to see how this series was going to continue. However, this is book 3, this is book 4, and guess what? In between is a massive, at least 100 years, but I'm sure there's more, time jump between the two. So the characters that we grow to love in this era are no longer there in this era. They are gone. They're dead because it's been 100 years at least. So that is very annoying. And so I was saying to you guys earlier that I'm going to give you a little bit of advice if you've completed this series or if you're just starting it for when you complete this series and before you move on to the second era. Now, it is all one series. There are 6 books so far in the series, but they are 2 different eras. Because of the fact that there is such a massive time jump, if you love Brandon Sanderson but you want to take a break from Mistborn, I recommend you do it after you've read book 3 but before you read book 4, and I can definitely grab this book. I can definitely recommend Steelheart, which is a YA sci-fi superhero story, completely different to the Mistborn series and a great way to really just, read something that's completely different to Mistborn. There's not even a magic system in this book. It's a superhero story. So I would recommend that. So then we go into this era, Era 2. Book 1 in Era 2, which is book 4, book 5, book 6. We'll get there. This book really let me down. I think I gave it like 2 or 3 stars because it just really let me down. So after we get the massive ending that we get in this book that was so amazing and I couldn't wait to read more, let's just jump 100 years in the future to not only completely new characters, but a completely different era. One thing you need to know about Era 1 is that the weapon of choice for any Mistborn or Misting or Mistborn or Misting is allomancy, the ability to ingest metals and use those magical abilities associated with those metals, and that is it. I love that about this first era. In the second era, things have changed, and while allomancy is still good, I still appreciate that there are things within allomancy that we've learnt in Era 1 that are still in Era 2, and then there are advanced things that happen in allomancy. So this is the Wax and Wayne series. I'll get onto that in a moment, but Wayne has an ability to create a speed bubble, which is really cool. We don't have that in Era 1, because when he creates the speed bubble, whoever's in that bubble still goes through normal time, but whoever's outside the bubble has completely slowed down, giving you time to strategize or just have a moment to think. So it's not like you've frozen everyone outside the bubble, but they've slowed way down, giving you more than enough time to have a quick chat about strategy, then pop the bubble and keep going through. I love that. But the main weapon of choice, and while this is a little bit of a spoiler, I'm going to tell you this because I would have wanted to know this going in. To me, it is so repugnant. I'm sorry, I love Brandon Sanderson, but this was really repugnant. The main weapon of choice in Era 2 are guns, and they're guns with allomantic metal bullets, but still, we have gone from a full-on magical world to a world of magic that's really more playing out like a Western. And I did not appreciate that because Era 1 is not a Western at all. I understand that at least 100 years have gone by and that we're in another era, but to me, fantasy and guns, or fantasy and swords, to me personally, they don't mix, because if you have the ability to use magic as a weapon, why would you pick up something so mundanely human as a sword or a gun? It takes away the magic for me, and guns are used predominantly in books 4, 5, and 6, and they are set in a Western style. So know that going in, that we have this beautiful world created in Era 1, and then we move into the saloon in Era 2, which is very annoying for me. Now let's talk about the fact that the second era of the Mistborn series is known as the Wax and Wayne series, and why. So, anyone here a Sherlock Holmes fan? Raise your hand. Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Raise your hand. Do you love this book? I don't. I'm sorry, but the whole detective genre is not my deal at all. Hello and welcome to the Wax and Wayne series in Mistborn, where we've never had detectives before, and now a detective very similar to Sherlock Holmes called Waxillium is the main character. I had a massive problem with this. So it's the Wax and Wayne series because it follows Detective Waxillium, and his partner, like Sherlock Holmes has Watson, Wax has his partner Wayne. The one redeeming factor of this book, despite the fact that there are guns, despite the fact that it's set in a Western, and despite the fact that it is a detective book all of a sudden, is the character of Wayne. He is this guy. I said with Era 1 that if ever I were to have a fictional boyfriend, it would be Kelsier, because he is just the best guy. I would die for this guy. He is absolutely amazing. But if I were to ever have a friend, I would want it to be Wayne. Wayne takes the most simple of things and shows so much gratitude towards it. One example would be hats. Wayne loves hats, and he just talks about how precious hats are, and I love that. He will also barter things for hats, so he will give a lot of money or a lot of gold or a lot of silver for someone's hat because he finds it to be a beautiful hat, and you can't go wrong with a hat. And this guy, I'm sure he's been put in for comic relief, but he just has such a beautiful nature, such a beautiful soul around him, and seriously, Wayne makes this second series, but otherwise was not a fan of this first book. So yeah, we follow Wax and Wayne, who are trying to solve a murder while using allomancy and guns in a Western setting. Yeah. Okay. Book 2 was much better. It was so much more fun, because by this time we've gotten used to the characters of this book, so now we can get through a book knowing who the characters are. Secondly, I do need to make a quick point about the second era. Era 1 celebrates a strong female protagonist, and while I'm sure the point of this first era is not to celebrate feminism at all, it really celebrates the strong female protagonist. This era does not. No, at least not in book 1. No. It's like we've gone back in time where women don't matter. And women need to respect their men. And yeah, I just feel like Brandon Sanderson went backwards with the second era, but you know what? These are my thoughts and I'm allowed to have them. So there are many examples, like when Wax is changing his top in a room because he got some blood on his top. There's a woman there going, "Oh, I should shield my eyes. Should I walk out of the room while you're changing?" Really? Like, it just takes us so far back. And Lord Waxillium, and I would not call you Wax because I'm a woman. No. This is not part of this world. Yes, at the beginning, Vin is treated awfully, but once Vin becomes part of the new crew, she's treated like a queen. She's treated like a goddess. So I don't understand why Brandon Sanderson went backwards and started treating women terribly in this first book. But anyway, it is what it is. Book 2. So, we finally know the characters. We know the situation. We know that women are no longer in power. And we know there are guns. It's a Western. It's a mystery. Yes, and once again, it is. Where the book becomes a little more complex at this stage. And I end up giving this book 4 stars because, once again, Wayne was amazing. But the story was okay. Then we move on to book 5. Now, again, One thing that I don't appreciate about Era 2 that I do with Era 1 is Era 1 is shrouded with consequences. It is so gritty, and there are deaths galore. Like, seriously, I had my issues with book 1. I did. Go check out my review. I had issues. But in Era 2, I don't recall the deaths. I think there's maybe like a handful in the whole thing, and that's it. Where there's a lot more, and they mean a lot more in Era 1. Anyway, book 6, the third book in the second era, was really good. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 5 stars. Everything about this book I really just loved because it went further than the others did. Now, whilst guns are still used, they're not as predominantly favoured as they are in the first 2 books. And I think Brandon Sanderson is finally realising that this idea to make this a Western, a series that never was a Western to begin with, was a really bad idea. At least that's what I'm hoping. But another thing that I love is this book comes full circle. There are things that happen throughout this book, but especially towards the end, that very strongly, in a very big way, connect to Era 1. I want to say book 1 for me personally, because it just makes more sense to say book 1. They connect to book 1, and I really, really, really appreciated that. But overall, this second era of Mistborn, it was hard to get through. It felt like a slap in the face because Brandon Sanderson had set up something so good with Era 1, and then he just tossed most of it aside and screwed most of it up, in my opinion, which I'm allowed to have because it's my video. Okay, so some bits of advice regarding Era 1. First of all, this series, so I'm going to separate them for the sake of just my last minute notes. Series 1, Series 2. This series is an adult high fantasy with hard magic systems, as I've already said. It has been republished and remarketed as a YA, but I disagree. I call it an adult fantasy for sure. While there is no swearing and while there are no graphic sex scenes, I can promise you that throughout the whole series, which thank you, Brandon Sanderson, because I'm starting to realise that's not the case with every single adult fantasy. But anyway, there are themes that occur in this series that I just don't think are appropriate for YA. But if you love fantasy and you are not opposed to high fantasy, a whole new world, hard magic systems with limitations, you will love this series. This first era is so amazing, and I'm yet to come across anyone who has come across Mistborn Era 1 and said they don't like it, who have gotten through the first book, liked the first book. I think everyone loves the first era. So, once the first era is done, and because if you're going to read Brandon Sanderson, I would definitely recommend that you start off with Mistborn. Because to me, for all the books that I've read so far, which aren't all of them, but for the books that I've read so far, this first era is Brandon Sanderson at his absolute best. Once you have read this series, the first era, move on to Steelheart. And if you really enjoy Steelheart, you can then move on to Firefight, which is the second book in this series. I'm not going to talk about these two because they're irrelevant to Mistborn, but I'm just making the point. Once you've read the first era, here's what I'm going to say. Once you've read the first era, I know you love it. I loved it too. I know that after reading the final couple of pages, you're like, oh my god, I need more and I need it now. I know, I get it. It is so good. Trust me, read something else. And if you want to make it Brandon Sanderson, I do recommend Steelheart. It was a great book. It's completely different to Mistborn. It's a great way to have a break. The reason I'm recommending that you stop halfway through the Mistborn series and read something else is because of how very different Era 2 is. The setting is completely different. It's a Western. The weapon of choice is completely different. It's predominantly guns. The way that the females are treated is completely different. They're not held up like goddesses or, women are people to respect. No, they are looked down upon. So it is, even though we've gone forward in times, it's like we've gone backward in time. So, once you have read something completely different, then go into this book, this series, and the book The Alloy of Law, but this series, the second era, knowing that it's going to be completely different. Completely different. The only thing that remains the same is that Mistborns, Mistings, Ferrochemists, Allomancy remains. The magic is still there, but otherwise it is completely different. New cast, new genre. I mean, I really would say yes, it's a fantasy, but I would call it a Western with a subgenre of a fantasy. So it's completely different. Know that going in, and then maybe, just maybe, you might also enjoy the second era. Now, I kept going because I love and believe so much in Brandon Sanderson that I would keep going no matter what. And I'm glad that I did, because The Bands of Mourning was really, really good. It was my first 5-star rated book for the second era of Mistborn. And so I highly recommend getting to this stage, because you will love this book. Now, a final recommendation from me. There have been people who are talking about how best to go about reading this entire series as a whole. You can either read it physically, you can read it as an audio, or you can read the book and listen to the audio at the same time. I'm going to very quickly talk about the audio options. On Audible, there is a narrator who will narrate all of these books. First era and second era. Oh, I'm sorry about the lighting there. And this author is good enough. Really. The author is. But I highly recommend, and there are going to be a lot of Mistborn fans who are going to say, no, wait, no, don't say that, no, this is going to ruin it. But, no. I highly recommend listening to Graphic Audio's version of Mistborn, because graphic audio is not one narrator. Graphic audio is more like those, remember back in the old days, those radio stations that would have the sound effects and the people playing characters and stuff like that? Graphic audio is set up as a movie for your mind, so it's more like a film, but an audio film, and so it has lots of sound effects and different characters, and it's different voice actors, and it's really amazing. So I recommend that. Our time is about to run out, but anyway, love this series. Going to reread it very, very soon. Gave all of them 5 stars. Thought this one was okay, but it is completely different. Letting you guys go. Peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I'll see you again soon. Mwah. Thank you for watching. Sorry, time's running out. Gotta go. Bye, guys. Happy reading. Bye. Enjoy Mistborn. Bye.